We are the only country in the world that has a constitutionally guaranteed freedom of speech. We need to hang on to the last little vestiges of our Constitution.
To August of last year, nobody really knew who I was.
There's about 12 people who are producing 65% of anti-vaccine misinformation.
We need to come together as Americans and realize that we have a war at hand here. Right?
Like, dude, how scared of this shit do you have to be to be wearing gloves, a face shield, a mask at this point?
Help us to urge folks and say to them, look, it's time to roll up your sleeve and get the shot.
Chiropractor in Omaha, Nebraska, responsible for 65% of the anti-vaccine misinformation. Put what I say to the test. Just don't write me off as crazy misinformation.
Doctor, please bring yourself in order. 600,000 people will die of cancer. 300,000 people will die of obesity this year. When is enough enough?
Sherri, it's so good to see you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. I've been looking forward to this.
Oh, me too. You know, you are one of my heroes and one of my favorite people. I just love you so much and support you so much. And that's why I wanted to have you on my podcast. So I'm so thankful and honored to be sitting down with you. And as a fellow disinformation dozen, it's great to be here with you. And I just wanted to just have a casual conversation, just kind of what's new in your life. And also our theme is obviously vaccinations and just the corruption. And I just read an interesting stat today that 40% of Americans are now saying that vaccines are needed, which is a huge win in our movement. And I feel like the tides are turning finally, which thank the Lord for that. So
wait a minute, go back. Did you say 40% think they're not needed or they are needed?
Only 40% say that they are needed. I don't know if that's true or not. I read that this morning. It was a big survey that was done from a friend of mine that posted it. I don't know anything about the survey, but there was an article going around. So I think it's, I'd like to believe it to be true. And I think that the tides are turning. And that's the one thing good about Corona Baloney. It really shined the light on this whole thing and really made the soil for truth to be rich. So Dr. Tenpenny, I would just love for you just give, you know, for the listeners here that don't know you, I think a lot of them do, but just for those that don't know, I'd love for you just to kind of give us a little bit about your backstory and how you got into this movement.
Well, a long, long time ago, because it started a long time ago. Actually, it started when I was born, because I was born into a chiropractic family and I was not vaccinated as a kid. So vaccines were not part of my radar screen ever, you know. And so when I graduated from college, went to medical school, graduated from medical school, became an ER board certified ER doc. Even when I was in the ER, you know, it was like I gave out tetanus shots like they were some special kind of candy, but the rest of them, like the nurses would come and there'd be some kid, he had sinus infection, ear infection, whatever going on. And the nurses would say to me, but he's behind on his vaccines. Do you think we should catch him up? Because there's this thing in the CDC, they call it capture, that when you've got one of them in front of you, you need to give them all their doses all at once because you may not have another chance. And that's how they define that. And even then I would say no. And I knew nothing about vaccines. And I said, no, don't bother. Don't bother with that. I mean, they got more important things. Their body has more important things to deal with right now than whether or not they should get a vaccine. And so, I was kind of looked down upon by most of my colleagues at that time. And then in September of 2000, I went to the National Vaccine Information Center meeting in Washington, D.C., and walked away after 3.5 days of meetings going, how did I miss this? I had been an ER doc since 1985. I'd had my own clinic in Cleveland and doing integrated medicine since 1996. And this was now September of 2000, and I really didn't know anything about vaccines. So I came home from that meeting and said, well, maybe I ought to look into this, because I was so compelled to hear doctors, lawyers, parents of vaccine injured kids, or parents of that had not vaccinated their kids, lawyers, all kinds of people, bench scientists, talking about the problems with vaccines. And I said, wow, maybe I ought to look into this. And, 24 years and 50,000 hours of research later, I guess I looked into it pretty thoroughly, and can stand pretty solidly by saying vaccines have never been proven to be safe. The definition of effective in vaccine research means they inject something and it creates an antibody. It does not mean they inject something and it protects you.
Right.
And they all cause harm at some level, every single one of them, either the vaccine itself or one of the ingredients. And they're absolutely not necessary. I mean, the kids who aren't vaccinated are the healthiest, most inquisitive, smart kids around. And they're not running around with their inhalers and their snuffy noses, or being on their Adderall or their Ritalin and all those sorts of things. So, I've taken a pretty long, hard, deep dive into this. And I think that after everything that we've been through with the COVID nonsense, and people really understanding what the COVID vaccines, air quotes, that they really were, what the injectable bioweapons really were, and how they harmed our DNA, how many millions of people around the world they've killed, and how many millions more have been permanently injured, and are on disability compensation or are dead. I think that a lot of people they may not be on a big platform. They may not be even on social media, on Facebook or anything, talking about it, but they know in their knower that this stuff is not good. They've been scammed. They've been lied to. And I think a good portion, like what you said, maybe 60% of the population, maybe more, are saying, what else have we been lied to?
Amen.
And now we're starting to look into the childhood vaccines. And I think that during COVID, when we had the lockdowns and everybody had to stay home and work from home for 2 years, and the kids didn't get vaccinated, they didn't get sick. In the meantime, a lot of people had babies. They didn't go to the pediatrician because either the pediatrician wouldn't see them, or they'd lost their insurance, or they had to stay in their house, or whatever it was. And the kids didn't die.
Right.
And so now they're going with baby 3 or baby 4. They're going, well, wait a minute. The first one didn't get any vaccines because we were in COVID. The second one didn't get any vaccines because we couldn't go to the doctor. We didn't have any insurance. Did the third and fourth kids even need any?
Right.
And I think there's a lot of factors that are playing into the questioning of the systematic poisoning of children on this planet.
100%. I mean, we talked about how many vaccines are now on the schedule ever since the Compensation Act was put in place in 86. I mean, there were 6 vaccines prior to that rollout, and now how many vaccines are going to be on the schedule now due to COVID vaccines? And so it is vitally important that we keep talking about this and bringing this information to the forefront, because, I mean, when is enough enough, and how many vaccines are they going to get away with before the people say enough is enough, and before there's some accountability with big pharma, in these adverse reactions that are occurring in our children. And so, I mean, do you know how many vaccines that's going to take? I mean, I've heard numbers up to 200 vaccines. Their goal is to have, I think, 200 vaccines by 2030 or 2045 or something like that. I've read different stats like that. I mean, now when they're talking about 10 boosters with COVID, I mean, and so it's really interesting. And in your opinion, when do you think there going to be a threshold at all, if any, and when do you think enough is enough?
Enough was enough in 1986.
Yes.
And they're going to continue to do this. And now with the new messenger, I have to change my glasses here. These are my computer reading glasses, and you're looking kind of funny. Come on, hold on a second.
I don't think the glasses are going to fix that, Doc.
Oh, let me put on the glasses. I think that with the messenger RNA platforms and with the cell line technologies, the dog kidney cells and the,
Yes.
all of those sorts of those things, that they can ramp up the vaccines quickly, that it doesn't take like a flu shot that generally takes 9 months for it to be manufactured and, tested and all of that stuff. They're saying that with the messenger RNA template, the platform of what they can do with that we can get a vaccine from start to ready to market in 6 weeks. And I've heard estimates where they've said that every bacteria and every virus should have its own vaccine. So we are just the perpetual pincushion.
Right.
And it's not going to stop until we collectively say no.
Right.
Because it's just a widget to them. It'd be
Yes.
like if you were making a light bulb, and everybody needed a light bulb, and everybody kept buying your light bulb, you'd keep making light bulbs.
Mm-hmm.
And so if everybody keeps buying your vaccines, and you've got governments, mandating that people get them, and there are more viruses and bacteria to create vaccines for, if you were the manufacturing company of the vaccine, it's nothing nefarious about that.
Mm-hmm.
You're creating a product that people are willing to buy. Just
Right.
like if it was a light bulb or a razor or, anything like that. If it's something that's a reusable product and people are continuing to buy it, it's just business to just make more of them. And
Right.
so until, when the day comes, we don't buy light bulbs anymore, that we're going to use LEDs and never buy another light bulb ever, or we're going to use candles or whatever we're going to use for an alternative light source. And then they decide that, well, making a light bulb probably isn't cost effective anymore because it costs a lot of money, and they languish on the shelf and they become expired and nobody wants them and they have to throw them away. Until that happens, until we in our minds start thinking of a vaccine as just a widget, it's just a light bulb, it's just a razor, it's just something that's a disposable product, and we say no thank you collectively, we're not doing this anymore. We're going to stop this systematic poisoning has been going on for 225 years.
Right.
It's going to keep going because it's just business.
Yep.
It's just business.
And it's big business. I mean, every vaccine that gets on the schedule, I heard it's almost $8 billion in profit. And I could be off on those numbers, but it's make no mistake, it's billions of dollars of profit.
When I first started doing this stuff, Ben, I remember back in about 2006, the vaccine sector, when you think about it like a pie diagram, if you say the pie diagram is the vaccine industry, then each one of the little sectors, like there's a sector for vaccines, a sector for statins, a sector for high blood pressure medication, a sector for chemotherapy, and you divide it into things like that. The sector for vaccines was the smallest. They considered the vaccine industry the poor stepchild of the entire pharmaceutical industry. And at that point in time, it was an $8 billion a year industry, and it was the poor people. And I was going to write something up about this, and I should, if I ever get around to it. There's already always too many things in the inbox. But vaccines are the economic loss leader for the entire rest of the industry. And for those that don't know what an economic loss leader is, it's sort of like if you're in the mall or you're walking down the street and you see a sign on the window, come in and get 3 free t-shirts today just for entering the store. So you go in the store, you get your 3 free t-shirts, and while they are there, they're going to do their best to sell you a $1,000 Armani suit. Those t-shirts were loss leaders to get you in the door so they could sell you something bigger. The vaccines are the economic loss leader for the entire industry, because out of vaccines, you have customers for life in children. The rest of their life, they're going to have medications for asthma, allergies, ADD, ADHD, insulin-dependent diabetes, cancer, ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, all sorts of endless diseases that they have to go to the doctors, get a bunch of tests, run up that machine, go to the subspecialist, run up those tests, then you get on a drug for life. The vaccines are the economic loss leader of the entire pharmaceutical industry. That's why they come against it so strongly and so oppose people like you and me that try to tell people just say no.
Right.
Because if they take that out, if a big set of kids are no longer getting vaccines, it's not really a lot of money to them on the front end, because even now the vaccine industry has gone from 8 billion a year to about 53 billion a year, because the Gardasil and the meningitis vaccines are expensive and they charge a lot of money for them. But so it's the sector itself. And so if a whole bunch of people didn't get vaccines, you may cut that down by a little bit of money. But in the big picture of what you've cut down, doctor's visits, tests, procedures, specialist visits, drugs for life, you've taken a big swash of money. If you've taken, maybe, I'm just going to make a number up, but say you take out 5% of the vaccine industry, say suddenly 5% of people are absolutely no more vaccines for me or my family, and it's only 5%. You know, if you just looked at that, you could go, oh, well, 5%, they'll make it up somewhere else. But the 5% compounds out to probably 30 or 40% of the market share. That's why they protect it, they defend it, they write laws to support it, they make mandates, they toss parents out of their practice who don't go along with the schedule. It's always all about the money. It's never about health.
Right. And if people knew the magnitude of what you're saying, it would cause a revolution overnight. I mean, if just look up package inserts and read about them. I'm collecting these package inserts. I have package inserts that are 20 something years old, and even on these package inserts, you see MS on these package inserts as an adverse reaction. And I read articles from, like, when they implemented the hepatitis B vaccine in France, MS skyrocketed, and MS wasn't even unheard of prior to this, and then bam, but they're not connecting the dots.
Unintentionally not connecting the dots.
That's exactly right. And it's really criminal, because I do think that a lot of doctors know this information. They just are not, they don't have the courage to talk about it or bring it to the forefront, because they fear persecution or their license. As you know, I mean, you stood in the gap, you have fought for the truth, and they have come after you, and God has, I firmly believe, he's protecting you, and you got your license reinstated for that. But how many other doctors are like you that have lost their license for, just either prescribing ivermectin or doing these other things, and going against the grain here? But going back to how these vaccines are causing these diseases, I mean, that is a profound statement. And I've said other things like that are very similar. I always say that what the seeds are to the farmer to bring a crop, these vaccines are to bring profit for big pharma. And, and how many other diseases are we not addressing here that are correlated to the vaccines?
All of them. I mean, if you go back far enough in time, you can see that when they started routinely giving a tetanus shot is when cardiovascular disease went through the roof. That's, like you mentioned, about MS, a lot of other neurological conditions, cancer. I mean, there's a lot of people that say that cancer didn't even exist before the vaccination program began. So, and look at healthy, unvaccinated people.
Mm-hmm.
They are not on daily chronic medications. They're healthy, and they may even be morbidly obese, but they are healthier than fully vaccinated people.
Right. I mean, I can, give testimony to that. I mean, I was never vaccinated. I also grew up in a chiropractic household, and my sister was never vaccinated. My brother was never vaccinated. And, thank God we were healthy. We got chickenpox as a kid, and we survived, but we didn't have any of the diseases that they have vaccines for. And my kids are unvaccinated, thank the Lord, and they're healthy. And, and so many people tell me all the time, your kids are so healthy. They're different, and they've never had an ear infection. They don't have allergies. They don't have asthma. They don't have these other issues. So there is a better way. And, and that's one of the things I want to talk to you about. Just for the listeners here, I mean, since we shine the light on the vaccine industry, there's a lot of parents and people that are going to listen to this and wonder, where do we turn and where do we go from here if they're not going to vaccinate? And I have an answer to that too, but I want to hear your perspective on what parents on the fence, what they should do, and speak on that for me.
Well, you know, deciding not to vaccinate is more than just deciding not to inject your children. I mean, there is a big leap. There's a whole bunch of other stuff you need to do. I mean, you need to take out white sugar, white flour. You need to have them eat organic, get out of the house, get away from their computers, go out and ride their bike and play soccer. I mean, it's an entire lifestyle that you have to change. I mean, if you just don't vaccinate your kids, but they're still drinking sugary, slurpy things, just and they're eating junk food all the time, and they're not getting at least one big helping of green leafy vegetables a day in one form or another. Um, that's real. It's only one step in the right direction. And I really think that not vaccinating is a whole life choice. It's not just about saying no.
Right.
But, you know, I think that what each of the parents need to do is you need to sit down, make a list of all of the diseases that you're trying to prevent. Measles, mumps, rubella, chickenpox, hepatitis B, hepatitis A, RSV, and know a little bit about what those are. And know that when you hear what the actual infection is, you go, that's no big deal.
Right.
Why do I want to, why do I need to inject a bunch of poisonous stuff to try to not get that? Those are not a big deal.
Right.
You know? And so, and they say, well, people died from it, like 2 or 3 compared to, in America, there's approximately 4 million live births per year. We've got a government guaranteed, the pharmaceutical industry has a government guaranteed 4 million potential customers a year with vaccine mandates that everybody, and the last time I looked, which was a few years ago, the number's probably bigger than this now. But at one point in time, I'm going to say, this was probably about 2018, that a fully vaccinated child was about $1,800. And so if you paid, that's how much you had to pay or your insurance had to pay to get your kid fully vaccinated. And this was, like I said, a few years ago. This was before COVID. So 1,800 times 4 million, that's a good chunk of change.
Right.
I remember at one point in time, I was a medical director for a Fortune 200 company here in town. And I was pretty good friends with the CEO of the company. And I remember him saying, and he was super anti-vax. In fact, when I interviewed for the job, it was the only question he asked me. And he said, so I hear you're against vaccines. And I thought, well, this is the end of this. This job, this isn't going there. And he's like, I said, well, yeah. And we sat there for 2 more hours and talked about it. Here, his daughter had just gotten pregnant, and he wanted me to educate her on vaccines so she wouldn't vaccinate his grandbaby.
Wow.
That's where it kind of started from, and we got to be really good friends. But I remember him distinctly saying, I would give anything for the government to have a government guarantee that I had 4 million customers a year that was going to buy my widgets.
Right.
And they were a manufacturing company. They made plumbing and pipes and stuff like that. And they had a bunch of different divisions. He said, oh, what I wouldn't give for the government to pass a law that would guarantee me that somebody had to buy one of my widgets, 4 million people a year. And that's just in the first year, because then that's at birth. So those 4 million babies that are born per year, you get vaccines at birth, and then at 2 months, and then at 4 months, and at 6 months, and then at a year, and then at 5 years, and then when they're a teenager. If you had 4 million, and let's say you don't have 100%, let's say it was only 3 million. Let's say it was 3/4 of that you injected them over and over and over and over. And then if they got sick with ear infections or asthma or those other things, they're buying more of my widgets to accommodate for that. That's the way people need to start thinking about the vaccine industry. It's a widget that causes harm. And when it causes harm, it's like somebody selling you a faulty carburetor for your car.
Right.
Blows up, and then you've got to go in and get a new engine. And then that misfires, and you got to put a new dashboard in. And then that misfires, and it's just a downhill line. That's what vaccines are all about.
Right. Well, Doc, do you remember January this year when the World Economic Forum, they met in Davos, and they had some legislation in the World Health Organization that talked about, with the pandemic treaty, that talked about those who are putting out disinformation, um, they they are going to use any authoritative measures necessary to silence those like you and myself. And that was in earlier this year. Now we have the new running mate of Kamala Harris, who says that literally is on record saying that freedom of speech should not be allowed if it's deemed disinformation, and that they should have full control over of what we say and do. And then you have Peter Hotez on record saying that we should have NATO and the Department of Homeland Security come after those who are anti-vaccine. When I hear these things, I think that's almost like a sanction of war on the American people, and it's really a violation of our constitutional rights here. And I want to know your perspective on when you hear these things, what goes through your mind, and what do you foresee? I mean, how do we avoid these situations and people like Peter Hotez?
I don't know that we can avoid them. I think that we need to we can't sidestep it. I think that we need to attack it head on. We are the only country in the world that has a constitutionally guaranteed freedom of speech.
Mm.
And with them trying to take away our freedom of speech, we need to hang on to the last little vestiges of our Constitution.
Right.
And fight back. And, fight back and talk louder. Be on more shows, get more attention,
Right.
To tell people what's coming and why. Mm-hmm. Because if we've got 60% of the country going, wait a minute, I'm not going to take that bird flu shot. That's a messenger RNA vaccine, and you're going to try to mandate that on me? Ain't no way, hoser.
Right.
People need to collectively decide now, not when it's your face like this. That's one of the problems with getting educated about vaccines. Parents generally get their first introduction to vaccines after the baby's born, mm-hmm. and they're going to be given within minutes a vitamin K and a hepatitis B shot. And then at that point, if the dad or the mom goes, wait a minute, I'm not so sure about that, then they get hammered and beat up because they had 9 months to prepare, but they didn't get prepared for that moment. Mm-hmm. Well, we've got the equivalent. We've got this pregnant period right now of time. It could be 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years, but we've got a period of time to make a plan to retain our constitutional right to freedom of speech, freedom of choice in healthcare. Mm. And I've said for many decades, the separation between me and my government has to start at the level of my skin.
Right.
Government starts to jab you and inject you with what they want in you. Mm-hmm. It's over.
Right. 100% agree. I mean, I love, Benjamin Rush and his quote. I mean, obviously he had the foresight to understand that we need to put medical freedom in the Constitution. And going back to that, I think that time is so important that we keep fighting for our freedoms. I mean, you mentioned the bird flu. Our government gave $175 million of our tax money to develop an mRNA bird flu vaccine. And we have the bird flu summit coming. I mean, that's in October. I would love to be a sponsor to that because you're guaranteed a speaking position at the summit. I mean, how funny would that be if we came and crashed that party? But I do think that they're going to interfere with some kind of event. I mean, when the government spends $175 million on the development of vaccine, they're going to want a return on that investment. I mean, what do you foresee happening in the days to come? Do you think that they're going to interfere with our elections with another pandemic or plandemic? And I don't think it's a matter of if, but a matter of when.
Well, I do on my own podcast, I interview a lot of people, and then I'm a guest on a lot of other people's podcasts. And it's been my experience so far that it's about a split. It's about the number of people are about half and half of whether or not we're either going to have an election. Mm-hmm. And about half people that I talk to say, no, there's no way we'll have an election. And then the other half think that there will be an election, but it's going to be like a sham. Right. There's no way because the Dominion servers have never been changed. We still have early mail-in elections that can be, scammed and frauded, that there's no possible way that we can have a fair election, even if we have one. But right. I do believe, and my personal belief is that they're going to pull out all kinds of things between now and November. And the biggest one that will get everybody's attention and bring everybody to their knees is going to be a banking crisis.
Mhm.
Because a monetary financial crisis across the board affects everybody equally. You know,
Mhm.
to have a bird flu or some other sort of, disease X that they want to release. People at this point in time can make their decision. They're either going to fall in line, wear a mask, get a shot, get tested, and all this other stuff, or they're going to say, "I'm not doing any of that. I'm going to take my
Right.
vitamin D and vitamin C and wash my hands, and I'll be just fine."
Right. Right.
So a banking crisis, and we've been watching what's been happening in Japan, for the last few months, and their stock market, that big stock market crash the other day, and the big dip in Bitcoin, I think was maybe just a little shot across the bow to see how people were going to react if that happened.
Right.
And there's going to be something. There
Right.
will be something. And
Right.
with this Kamala Harris and her new running mate, Waltz is his last name?
Tim Walz. Yep.
Walls.
Yep.
Who he is a piece of work.
Oh yeah. I hate to say it, he's from Nebraska.
Oh, but he's the governor of Minnesota though,
Governor
right?
of Minnesota, yeah, but he's from Nebraska. Yeah, so he's as liberal and
He is
tyrannic.
he's
Yeah.
quite a piece of work.
Oh yeah, he is. I mean, he's, how do you say it? He's a nut. And it's amazing to me that Kamala even got the ticket. I don't know how. She never got a single vote. And they're like, "Oh, we got democracy." I'm like, "Well, how did Kamala get the
I'm really,
DNC?"
that's a really interesting point, Ben, because a lot of people I've talked to, including myself, are like going, there hasn't been a convention. She
Yeah.
hasn't been nominated and elected.
Yep.
Where are all of I mean, not every single Democrat in this country is a woke idiot.
Right.
They're not. I mean, there's some Democrats that really believe in the old fashioned, Democratic Party, like the John F. Kennedy Party, and they really believe that it is a blowback against big fascism, and they've got, good standing. They don't believe in a lot of the woke agenda. Where are they? And
Right.
why aren't they standing up and saying, "Wait a cotton picking minute. I
Exactly
didn't,
right.
we didn't, our whole party didn't get to vote on this."
Exactly right. I mean, that's why he said I think it was going to be a Gerald Ford repeat. I mean, Nixon was under trial for Watergate, and he appointed Gerald Ford as a VP. When Nixon stood down, Ford pardoned him, and Ford got to be president without ever getting a single vote, because I believe the VP originally died of Nixon's, and then I think that's how it went down. I'm not exactly sure, but somehow Ford got in without a single vote, and now Kamala's doing the same thing. This is a Gerald Ford repeat. I thought for sure that she was going to elect Newsom, but either way, if Kamala gets in as president, it's going to be a terrible thing. I mean, look at David Dalton. He's hopefully going to be on our podcast soon, but he was an investigative journalist in Planned Parenthood and was talking about and exposing Planned Parenthood for selling aborted fetal parts. And then, and he brought those felony charges against Planned Parenthood in 2015. And Kamala Harris was the attorney general, and she basically dropped those charges against Planned Parenthood and then fined him $25 million. And so Kamala is the Planned Parenthood's pick. I mean, they're endorsing her. I mean, how much money they just donate to her campaign, and it's all evil, and it's all, I feel like it's such a satanic, like, bail practice, the whole abortion industry, and they go hand in hand with the vaccine industry. And I really wish people would know that it just the whole system should be just exposed for what it is. And I know you're very spiritual. I know you are a Christian, and that's what I love about you too, Doc. And I just you see it for what it is, and it is. It's just an evil practice. And I'm looking for the day when Jesus returns, and that's where we put our hope, because it is very important that we have Christ in our lives now more than ever before. And I know you see that as well. And just what are your thoughts on the times that we're in, and just from a spiritual side, and how much evil is embedded into the Planned Parenthood system?
Well, I do a podcast twice a week called Happy Hour with Dr. T. When I started, it was in June of 2020, And we did it 5 nights a week. Then it went to 3 nights a week. Now it's been at 2 nights a week for a couple of years. And Tuesday night, I call it guest night, where I invite pastors and authors and Christian businessmen and women to just to have a conversation and then to pray together on Tuesday night. And Thursday night, we do an in-depth Bible study program. We're getting ready to launch one in the book for the month of September. It will start in 2 weeks, I guess. Can you believe September's in 2 weeks?
No, it's great. It is crazy.
It's for the month of September on Thursday night with Dr. Judd Burton on the books of Enoch. And so we do in-depth Bible study things on Thursday night. And then on Tuesday night, we have, like I said, pastors and authors. And, it's been interesting over the last couple of years to get a broad perspective on where these more learned type of people really feel we are in the end times continuum. Almost uniformly across the board, everybody says, we are in as in the days of Noah, as in Matthew 24. There's just no doubt about it, and we've never been at this point in time in history. And recently I had a gentleman on who was we were talking about this whole thing between now and the election and about the economic crash. And he said that economic crash is exactly what is needed for the real Antichrist to show up on the scene, because it will uniformly across the board, everybody will be affected by it. It won't be like a bad storm or, weather wars or this nonsense about global warming. It won't be a pathogen. I don't think they'll ever get away with a thing like they did with COVID the next time. Because I think that fool me once, shame on me, fool me twice, that ain't going to happen.
Right.
And there'll be a small portion of fear-based people who will fall into that, but mostly not. So, but with an economic tidal wave where they can introduce the central bank digital currency, the programmable currency, and they can introduce the mark of the beast and have the rise of the Antichrist to save all of us, pull us out from all of this, that we can still have power and food and water and all those things. It's all coming together.
It is 100%. You're going to open a can of worms, though, Doc, by talking about the Book of Enoch, because I remember seeing you on a speaking event with Stephen Quayle, and it was the Gen 6 productions, and I remember you and I years ago I was on your podcast and we talked about that a little bit, about the Nephilim and the days of Noah, and I feel like that's such an interesting topic. And I don't know if we should go there or not in this podcast, but it's a fun topic to talk about the Nephilim and just the times that we're in. And I feel like we are going to be in the days of Noah, and and I feel like we're very close to I think God intervening in a big way. And I just pray that people put their faith in Christ, and again, it's so important to speak out and to be bold and courageous. God calls us to be the salt and light of the earth and not the sugar. And, for people that are like you and myself that are standing in the gap, being bold and courageous and fighting the fight. And, what do you have to say for people that, I had a good friend of mine and I love him dearly. So if he ever listens to this, I love you very much, but he came at me and he kind of challenged me on my views when I posted about the Olympics and the whole introduction about the Olympics. And it was these transgender, woke agenda. And I feel like it was very sexualized. And it was just, it was whether there is a Greek dinner or whether they're mocking Christ, either way, Galatians says that Christ shall not be mocked. God shall not be mocked. I mean, do you feel like we should approach this? I posted, hey, when is enough? And I said, how blasphemous can we be before God rains judgment and, and brings judgment upon our nation? And he said, listen, that's not Christ-like character. That should not be our approach. That should not be our angle.
Oh my gosh. Does he forget about Jesus flipping the tables and chasing the coin makers out of there with a whip?
Right. Yes. And calling brood of vipers and these things. Right. So yes, continue on. I want to hear what your thoughts are.
Well, I mean, seriously, we've bought into this good news, goodwill Christianity, of turn the other cheek, turn the other cheek, turn the other cheek, never stand up for the right is wrong. We blur the edges on morality. We, instead of standing on what the word of God says about morality and about, what we need to live by is the 10 commandments, right?
Mhm.
Honor your father and your mother. I heard a little thing the other day that said there is the word parent doesn't exist anywhere in the Bible. It's either father or mother. It's
Mhm.
not about parenting. It's about a father doing what he needs to do to train his children and give them wisdom. And it's about the nurturing part of mothering of what they need to do. It's really not about parenting, which I thought was pretty interesting. But it's like the 10 commandments, right?
Mhm.
I am what they are. I'm the Lord thy God. You'll have no other gods, little g, before me. You're not
Yes.
going to worship money. You're not going to worship politics. You're not going to say, say there's no, in the beginning, God created man and woman. He
Mhm.
didn't create man and woman and 109 additional gender types. He didn't do that. And, we need to just get back to the very basics of the Bible. I mean, the
Yes.
Bible has hundreds of layers of understanding. That's
Mhm.
why you can read it and read it and read it and read it. And every time you read it, you get something better, deeper, more
Yeah.
profound, a broader perspective about stuff.
Yeah.
Back to the basics, the very basics is the 10 commandments.
Mhm.
Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not commit adultery,
Mhm.
those sorts of things. And just keep it straight and and not make excuses. Thou shalt
Mhm.
not kill except, thou shalt not commit adultery except when it's okay now in our society to sleep with your boyfriend or girlfriend.
Right.
Things have changed with time. When did God's laws and rules change?
Right.
When did he suddenly say, excuse me, I made a mistake, I'm going to change this?
Yes.
Never.
Right.
Never, you know? And
Right.
so, I think that, you were alluding to about the Nephilim and what we did on the Book of Enoch was I just let Dr. Judd talk. I mean, he's an anthropologist, an archaeologist, and has his PhD in history, and has written lots of books and has had whole courses on biblical archaeology and anthropology. And we just talked about how one Enoch is really, when we talk about Enoch, there's really three books of Enoch. The first book of Enoch is the one that most people talk about. And about whether or not, well, I've had some of my Christian friends say, I don't even touch that. It's like
Yeah.
sacrilegious. And then I have other of my really strong Christian friends that say it's just a historical document that adds context and color and
Yeah.
describes things that weren't described before. It's
Right.
sort of like if I wrote a book about Queen Elizabeth. I mean, how many different books are written about Queen Elizabeth? There's just one Queen Elizabeth, but
Right.
there's different angles on,
Yes.
what was going on society-wise, what was going on with her wars, what was happening in her court. I mean, there's a lot of things to say about Queen Elizabeth. That doesn't make one right or wrong.
Right.
So the apocryphal literature, in my opinion, about the apocryphal literature, it's that it adds color and context to what was going on in the society of the day, that you can and what was going on in these other cultures, like these other like the Amalekites and the Amalekites and all the kites and ites and sort of thing that was going on. They were there.
Right.
And so these other extra the apocryphal texts give you historical context that
Mhm.
puts things into play of why God called out his people to be different and to
Yes.
live differently and to do the things differently that they do. So anyways, I found it really interesting. And back 2002 and almost all of 2003, I was sort of stuck on the verse in Genesis 6, as in the days of Noah.
Right.
Really was like, where are we on that timeline and how close are we? So I had a lot of pastors and a lot of authors on to talk about the Nephilim and as in the days of Noah. It was really pretty interesting. It was a great bunch of podcasts. So your shameless promotion here. If you are not a podcast member and you want to become a podcast member and go back and listen to all of those great discussions, just go to drtenpenny.com, hover over the podcast tab. It's $20 a month. I think that 20 or $25 a month. I think if for the extra special version or something like that.
Yeah.
And so we've made it affordable, and think that we can do everything for somebody's time and budget because there's lots of other podcasters, lots of other things to read. But those podcasts from Happy Hour were really interesting.
I would
And
love to listen to him. And you had Dr. Judd was the one of the docs that would talk about it.
that was he's coming up in September.
September.
It's Thursday night at 6 p.m. Eastern time. They're free if you watch them watch them at the live, and I think they stay up on we live stream on Cloud Hub, Telegram, X, and Rumble. And they're free. They think they stay up there for 24, 30, 48 hours, something like that. Then they go into the podcast area. So it's 6 o'clock Eastern time. And I think they're up there for you, so you can watch them. They're up for about 48 hours, 36 hours for sure. And they're on Thursday night at 6 p.m. Eastern time. It's Dr. Judd Burton.
Okay.
He's got a website. It's I think it's juddburtonbeyond.net, where he has tons of information and newsletter and all that stuff. He's quite the scholar, and I think you'll enjoy it.
I would love to, look into that. Well, can you plug his website one more time, Doc, for me?
I think, let me just double check and make sure that I'm giving it to you the right way. I think it's Judd Burton Beyond .net.
Okay.
.net. I know it's .net. Sure.
So I want to ask you, since you've been on the Nephilim and have had so many conversations about it, do you feel like the Nephilim are still alive today?
Yes.
Yeah, I do too.
Yes, I do, because, it says in the book of Genesis, it says,
like the days of Noah.
The Nephilim were here before and after. And we went into it. I pre-record almost all my podcasts. I have a couple that are live. Let me just get you. The website is Burton, Burton, burtonbeyond.net.
Okay.
Burtonbeyond.net. Not yet. And yes, they're here. And it was interesting what we talked about in that podcast. So I'll give you a little preview of what we talked about, which is in week 3, because we were talking about the Nephilim. And, one of the theories about the Nephilim still being here is that they were disenfranchised in their spirit. The demons were left here. Mm-hmm. That's why when Jesus went through the land and he cast out all the demons, they were here in demonic form. Their spirit was still here. And then he said, Dr. Michael Heiser theory was that there was more than one incursion. Mm-hmm. When the Watchers came down and had sex with the women, and then the Nephilim were born, that happened more than once. It's only, and it kind of makes sense because 1,000 years later, after this thing supposed happened, and then we had the flood. 1,000 years later, David's killing Goliath with a stone.
Right.
And so there were still giants that were here
post flood.
Yeah, and we had conversations about, and there really isn't an answer to this, but the conversation about, did the Nephilim procreate? Did the Nephilim have babies? No, how did they stay around for so many years? Hundreds, thousands of years, from the time of the flood to the time of David killing Goliath. And then, when Joshua went into the promised land and said, well, wait a minute, there's giants in there.
That's right.
No, we're not going in there. So they've been around.
Right.
And then he talks about the giants and the serpent mounds and things like that in North and South America.
Right.
To a lot of that. It was really, really interesting. So I hope you and your listeners will mark your calendars to come and join us as when these go live in September.
I would love to put a link in there, Doc. So maybe send me a link, or have Michelle send me a link for that, and we'll plug it for you. And and going back to the serpent mounds, they're only visible by the air, and it kind of ties into Ephesians 2:2 when it says Satan is the prince and power of the air. It is fascinating to me. We have 10,000 burial mounds in Ohio alone. And even look at the quote by Abraham Lincoln. He said that, my eyes have gazed upon the burial mounds of the extinct giant whose bodies fill the mounds of America. I mean, that was a direct quote from Abraham Lincoln, and it's well documented, but it used to be, I think, almost well known. It's just like the vaccine industry. They're covering up so much information on the vaccine industry and the censoring this information. I have dabbled and done a ton of research in the Nephilim, and I realized they're covering up this information and censoring, and all the bones were given to the Smithsonian. And I talked to a gentleman by Travis, I think it was Travis Roy, who talked about how he had 1,000 newspaper archives talking about how they had giant bones and skeletons in the burial mounds here. So it is interesting, and I know we're wrapping up our time. We're just getting into the interesting things here, but Doc, I do want to give you the last word here, and I know we kind of talked a lot about all different things here, but Doc, I just appreciate your time, and I appreciate you so much, and and I just value and have so much respect for you. But I do want to give you the last word to you, and just to have a word of encouragement, and where people can find you, Doc.
Well, I just hope that, people look at this time that we're in right now, as in today, today in August, that this is the inhale before the next exhale. Everything seems to be okay. People are traveling, they're going to Europe, they're going on cruises, they're doing all that stuff. This is not the way, in my opinion, this is the inhale before the next exhale. And I think that people need to be prepared right now and get prepared for what may be coming next and not be left in the lurches. Have food and water and gold and some silver in board. But most importantly, get prepared spiritually, because, we can build up mansions on this land. We can build in $5 million palaces and have all the money and all the different things, have big businesses. But when you die, you're dead. None of that comes with you. None of it. So, do you build your house on sand, or do you build your house on castles and put your money and all your future and fortune into the hereafter? So one of these days, when you're standing in front of the Lord, he can say to you, "Well done, good and faithful servant," rather than, "Why were you chasing money? And the most important thing for you was to go on the next trip."
Amen.
And the people can find me. They can go to drtenpenny.com, which is our primary website. Everything sort of buttons up there across the top: our store, our shop, all of our specialty products, our podcasting. There's a lot of podcasts that we do for free. So under the podcast tab, you can go in there and look at what's for free, in addition to the paid podcasts that we have. And, I just hope you come and join us. We're pretty busy.
Yeah. Awesome, Doc. Well, I love and appreciate you. Thank you so much for your time. I love the conversation that we have. We'll have to bring you back on, Doc. Again, thank you for listening. Thank you. Share this podcast far and wide. And God bless you guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care, Ben.
Yes, you too.
To August of last year, nobody really knew who I was.
There's about 12 people who are producing 65% of anti-vaccine misinformation.
We need to come together as Americans and realize that we have a war at hand here. Right?
Like, dude, how scared of this shit do you have to be, right, to be wearing gloves, a face shield, and mask at this point?
Help us to urge folks and say to them, look, it's time to roll up your sleeve and get the shot.
Chiropractor in Omaha, Nebraska, responsible for 65% of the anti-vaccine misinformation. Put what I say to the test. Just don't write me off as crazy misinformation.
Doctor, please bring yourself in order. 600,000 people will die of cancer. 300,000 people will die of obesity this year. When is enough enough?